Welcome to the Fundamentals of Fitness, the podcast where we strip away the noise, the guilt, and the unrealistic expectations around health and fitness. And we focus on what actually works in real life. I'm Alison, your no-nonsense coach. So whether you're out on a walk, driving to work, or just taking a bit of time for yourself, let's settle in, because this one might change how you see your progress entirely. Today, we're starting something new, but also something very honest. Because before we build more on the progress, we need to address something that stops most people before they ever get there. People don't fail because they're lazy. They don't fail because they don't care. They don't fail because they're incapable. Most people quit because what they expect to happen doesn't match what actually happens. And when those two things don't line up, your motivation drops, your frustration rises, and your consistency breaks. So today, it's a reality check, not to discourage you, but to give you something far more useful: clarity. So pop on those trainers or grab that cuppa. Let's get straight into it. So let's talk about the expectation gap. Most people start their fitness journey with a picture in their head, a clear expectation of what progress should look like. They expect steady weight loss, visible changes maybe every few weeks, workouts that get easier, and motivation that stays high. But that's not how physiology works. Progress is never linear. It doesn't move in straight lines. Instead, it looks like early progress, then a slowdown, then a plateau, then small improvements again. Now, we've already covered the adaptation curve in a previous episode. And what we've already covered is how the body adapts in different phases. We start with an initial stimulus, which leads to rapid adaptation and then stabilization. This means that early results feel fast, but later, the results feel slow. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your body has adapted. If we look at athletes, they don't expect constant visible progress. They expect periods where nothing seems to change because they understand that adaptation takes time. For example, a client of mine might lose weight in the first few weeks and then see the scales stop. And that their interpretation can sometimes be that this just isn't working. But physiologically, what's happening is that a metabolic adaptation is taking place, water fluctuations are happening, and body recomposition, it's changing. Progress hasn't stopped, it's just less visible. And this is where most people quit. So let's have a little reflection. Let's think about your own experience. Have you ever felt like things were working and then suddenly they weren't? That moment is where expectation and reality diverge. And if you don't understand that, it can feel like failure. So let's discuss the emotional drop-off. When our expectations aren't met, the emotional response changes. And this is where most people don't realize what's happening. Because from the outside, it just feels like motivation's disappeared. But underneath that, there's a very clear process. At the start of any new plan, you'll get high motivation, high clarity, and high commitment. You feel focused, you feel in control, and you feel like this time is definitely different. And in many ways, it is. But then reality begins to show up. Your progress can slow, your effort feels harder, and the results become less obvious. And emotionally, the experience changes. Instead of excitement, you feel frustration, doubt, impatience, sometimes even boredom. And boredom is a big one because people don't expect progress to feel repetitive. So let's talk about the physiology behind this. And at a neurological level, this is linked to your brain's reward system. At the beginning, the novelty is high, the dopamine is elevated, and the engagement is strong. But over time, the novelty decreases, the reward becomes less immediate, and the dopamine response reduces, which means the same actions feel less exciting, less rewarding, and harder to sustain, even though they are all still effective. There's an important distinction here. Your progress hasn't slowed because the plan stopped working. Your motivation has changed because the reward perception has changed. And that difference is what matters. See, athletes spend long periods training without visible results, weeks, months, sometimes even years, because they understand the reward is delayed, and more importantly, they expect it to be. One of my clients might say, I feel like I'm doing everything, but nothing is happening. But if we look objectively and we take in the bigger picture, they're stronger, their routine is consistent, and their habits have improved. What's actually happening is the progress is internal, but internal progress doesn't feel as rewarding as visible change, does it? And that's where the emotional drop-off begins. This is the most dangerous phase because nothing is wrong, but it feels like something is. And that feeling leads to second guessing, changing the plan again, losing structure, or stopping entirely. So let's think about your own journey. Have you ever reached a point where you were doing everything right, but it didn't feel like enough? That's not failure. That's the emotional drop-off. And once that emotional shift happens, it leads directly into the most important moment, the decision point. This is the moment that determines everything. Not the start, not the plan, but the moment where progress feels slow. Because this is where people decide what to do next. This is the fork in the road. At this point, there are always two paths. Path 1, reaction. This isn't working. This can lead to changing the plan, chasing something new, reducing consistency, stopping altogether. Path 2, response. This is part of the process. This leads to staying consistent, making small adjustments, continuing the system. It's the same situation, a different interpretation, and a different outcome. So let's look at the psychology of this moment. This is where cognitive appraisal comes in. This is how you interpret a situation. It determines your emotional response, your behavior, and your outcome. If you interpret slow progress as failure, you react emotionally. If you interpret this as normal, you stay structured. And this is not about being positive. It's about being accurate. One of the biggest drivers of quitting is uncertainty. Humans don't like not knowing. So when progress isn't clear, the brain tries to resolve that discomfort, often by changing the plan or looking for something new or seeking faster results. But that creates instability. See, some athletes are trained to tolerate this uncertainty. They don't need constant confirmation. They trust the process because they understand that progress is not always visible. Many people don't fail once. They repeat the same cycle. They start strong. They hit resistance. They change their approach. Then they restart over and over and sometimes over again. And each restart resets their progress. The people who succeed are not the ones who avoid this moment. They're the ones who stay when it happens. They stay when it feels slow. They stay when it feels boring. And they stay when it feels uncertain. And that is what separates progress from quitting. So if this moment is inevitable, the question then becomes, how do you handle it? So how do we avoid this cycle? Not by trying to feel more motivated, that's for sure, but by changing how you approach the process. Step 1, expect the drop-off. The emotional drop-off is not a surprise. It's part of the process. So instead of being caught off guard, anticipate it. Step 2, normalize slow progress. Progress will slow. This is not failure. This is adaptation. And once you understand this, you stop reacting to it. Step 3, focus on behavior, not outcome. Results fluctuate. Behavior can stay stable. So instead of asking, is this working? Ask, am I doing what I said I would do? That keeps you anchored. Step 4, stay in the system. Your system exists to protect you from emotional decisions, not to work only when you feel good. See, athletes rely on process too, because process is stable, it's planned. Emotion is not. Step 5, reduce the need for validation. One of the biggest challenges is needing constant proof. Proof that it's working, proof that you're progressing, proof that it's worth it. But real progress doesn't always provide that immediately. So the shift is trust behavior over immediate feedback. You don't need more motivation. You need better expectations. Because when your expectations match reality, your consistency becomes easier. Most people don't quit because they can't do it. They quit because they expect it to feel different. They expect it to maybe be faster or easier or more obvious. But real progress is slower than you think. It's less visible than you expect, and it requires more consistency than most people realize. And that's not a bad thing. Because once you understand that, you stop chasing those quick results. You stop reacting to short-term fluctuations, and you start building something far more valuable, long-term progress. Consistency that doesn't break under pressure, and results that actually last. And if this episode has helped you reset your expectations around progress, share it with someone who feels like they're stuck or not seeing the results they want, because often they're closer than they think. And if you're building long-term strength, health, and performance, make sure you're following the fundamentals of fitness so you don't miss what's coming next. Next time, we're breaking down something that catches everyone out, why working harder doesn't always mean better results. Until then, train with structure, recover with intention, and build something that lasts. I'll see you next week.